Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to our review of Fire on the Mountain from Legion Wargames. Now this is a wargame that covers the one-day engagement, September 14th, 1862, in the US Civil War between the Union and Confederate forces. Now I'm going to be honest, this is a tricky game to review. Let's start with our 1-minute power review. First up, things I like. The map is absolutely gorgeous. Designed in part by Barber, it is a beautiful map that captures the setting and the terrain of the battle so eloquently. Second thing, the counters are absolutely gorgeous. I love the double-wide counters and how they integrate into the mechanics and game flow. Third thing, I really like the gameplay system. This game flows and it's very fun to play. Not all is wonderful, however. I found the rules to be clear, but not quite comprehensive enough. I've run into a lot of situations where I'm just not sure what to do and how to handle certain combat and movement situations. Second thing, and this is a big one if you're a Civil War purist, about 25% of the Confederate order of the battle that's in the game actually wasn't at the battle. Third thing, I find myself in a couple places wishing for an additional player aid or perhaps a little bit different design to the counter to help the game flow with a couple of the mechanics. Lastly, there's one minor rule I'm really not a fan of, and there's one rule about combat in the woods that I'm starting to wonder if it might be a little bit overpowered. Bottom line, what do I think? I give it a tentative thumbs up. I think this system has a ton of potential. I love the gameplay. I'd like to see a second iteration of the rules to kind of flesh out the system, and I'm curious to see how the developer and the designer are going to handle the Confederate order of battle and what changes will be made to the game to kind of figure that out. And I know that's something that they're working on. But bottom line, tentative thumbs up, big thumbs up for a potential for this system to turn into something great. If you'd like to hear more, stick around for the in-depth review. First up, let's talk about things I like. The map, I'll show screenshots here and I'll show some images of video and things like that. It's absolutely beautiful. And not only is it beautiful, it's functionally beautiful, if that makes sense. This is a battle that happened in hilly, wooded terrain, which was a big factor behind the Confederate forces' ability to defend, even though they were heavily outnumbered, especially in initial stages of the battle. And you really get a sense, as you're trying to root out these Confederate forces in hills as the Union forces, that it's just tough to do, right? And the map is just so beautiful and evocative. It creates almost this kind of miniatures type experience, but it's just such a joy to be moving the pieces around, to look at the terrain, and immediately from that visual look, you get a sense for how tough this battle was and how hard it was. And as you're trying to get to the two gaps that the Union forces are trying to attack, you're like, oh man, you're almost tired because you have to go uphill just playing the game, right? It's like if you ever have to run or hike up a big hill, that's what sometimes it feels like as the US forces when you're playing this. That's how good the map is. It just kind of captures that emotional feel of playing in rough and rugged terrain. The second thing connected to that, the counters are absolutely gorgeous, and I love the double-wide counter system. The counters have a unit facing, so it creates kind of this flow where you're worried about the facing of the units and they're going in different directions. It feels like a Civil War engagement, and the map counter combination is so exquisite and fun to play on. I mean, you take pictures of this game, they're just absolutely gorgeous. Just point the camera at it, it's like, wow, this looks cool. So those are two big pluses. Let's talk a little bit about gameplay, because that's really the essence of what is a good game. Is it fun to play? Unequivocally, this game has a ton of potential, and right now, as it stands right now, I greatly enjoy playing this game. The double-wide counter system, the assaults, the artillery, the movement rules, the rugged terrain, I feel like I'm really getting a sense for how this battle played out. You get a sense for the terrain and the wooded aspect of it, how it influenced the battle. It's just fun to play. And certain games get all the rules perfect and all the rules buttoned up and all the rules really nice and tight. And yet when you play the game, it's just tedious, right? There's no tension. It doesn't have that drama. The decisions aren't that interesting, and it can just be kind of a boring game to play. That's the complete opposite with this game, where I feel like it's just an exciting game to play. I feel like you're trying to take the gap. You're trying to hold the gap. Right now in the game that I'm playing right now, the Union Confederate forces are just toe-to-toe right on the second gap, and it's not quite clear who's going to kind of pull out the final victory. So I feel like the tension and the balance in the game system, it's not super complicated. I mean, it takes a while to kind of figure out some of the little kind of intricacies of combat and movement and retreat and things like that. But the system works well enough. I think after you play once or maybe twice, you're really going to get smooth at the game system. And it's just got, it just plays smooth. It's a fun game to play. All is not perfect, however, and I do want to mention a few things that I think you should know about if you're thinking about buying the game. First up, while the rules I feel are clear, I don't feel like they're quite comprehensive yet. There's a number of cases where I've been playing the game and I wonder what to do and I can't find the answer in the rule book. And I've been posting a few questions to Board Game Geek, and I know some other players that are playing the game are doing likewise. And I've got a few more that I still haven't posted yet, because it's happening quite a bit, where I'll get something and I'm just not quite sure what to do, because it just doesn't seem to be quite covered in the rules. So I mention that because if you're a player who wants 100% clarity in the rules, and what I've been doing now is kind of filling in, I want to play the game, right? So I'm kind of filling in the blanks and kind of saying, well, I'm going to play it like this, although I'm not quite sure if that's the designer's vision for how it should be played. So if you're a player that needs that 100% clarification of rules and wants a system that's perfectly spelled out, I think the game needs another iteration of rules to get to that level. And I think you might be a little bit frustrated by not so much the ambiguity in the rules, but by the incompleteness of the rules as they are right now. I could give a bunch of examples, but I'll give one simple example that I ran into early on, which was units can suffer enough casualties that they rout. And when they rout, you're supposed to move it back to a road and then off its friendly side of the map as quickly as it can. And in the rules it says if a routing unit can't move into an enemy zone of control. And the rules stop there, right? Well, as soon as you play the game, I had this happen in almost like the first couple hours where a unit was routing and it came to an enemy zone of control. And then my question is, okay, I can't move into the zone of control, but the question is, right, what does that unit do? Does it stop? Does it surrender? Because there's a surrendering mechanic in the rules. Or does it try to move around to its best of its ability that enemy zone of control? And the designers and the developers answered the question that they said, well, okay, the unit surrenders. Well, then the next question is, does the unit move into the enemy zone of control and surrender, or does it stay where it is and surrender? Those are little things, right? But I feel like, for a rule set to be complete, you should be able to find that answer in the rule book, right? And they're little and they're detailed. They might happen once a game, but that gives you that kind of confidence that you're playing the game the way the designer intended it to be played. And I feel like the rules just aren't quite there yet. So in some cases, I'm kind of, I want to play the game, so I'm kind of filling in the gaps. And if you're a kind of player who needs that 100% clarification of rules, you might get a little bit frustrated with the rules right now because it just doesn't have that level of clarity. You're probably going to have to dip onto Board Game Geek to find some answers and maybe even have to kind of fill in some of the blanks on your own. Does that make it a less fun game? No, but it does slow down that learning process a little bit. And I think that, again, if you want that clarity, it's not quite there yet, and I might be inclined to wait until there's a second iteration of rules to really flesh out the rule system so that you're playing the game as the designer intended it to be played. Next issue that has to be mentioned is the Confederate Order of Battle, and I think this is going to be something that's either a very big issue for you, kind of a game breaker, at least at this point in time, or you're going to be like, yeah, okay, I get it, that's fine. So here's the thing. As it stands right now, and I'll show an image of this, the Confederate Order of Battle has in the game a division that wasn't actually at the battle. So about 25% of the existing Confederate Order of Battle in the game just wasn't there. Now the designers and developers had said, oh, we overlooked it. They're working to fix that, and they're kind of making changes in the gameplay to try to compensate and try to make the game work with this chunk of the Confederate Order of Battle missing. And to be fair, this division that shows up at 3 p.m., which is past the halfway point of the battle. It's going to take them about an hour or more before they get engaged in the battle. So you're really talking about the last maybe quarter or third of effective gameplay where these reinforcements come into play. But still, it's a significant chunk of troops that the Confederates get towards the end of the game. And yet, for me, the game feels very balanced the way it is, and I'm more kind of concerned about the play balance, the game flow, the way the game feels, and how it historically captures that sense of the conflict rather than the actual specifics of the order of battle. So for me, it's not a big issue. Would I like to have the accurate order of battle? Yeah, but it's not a game breaker for me. However, if you're a Civil War historian and you play these games to kind of recapture that historical accuracy, this is probably a pretty big issue. And again, like with the rulebook, if you're a player that needs that accuracy of order of battle, I might be inclined to wait to see how the developer and the designer handle the situation with the Confederate Order of Battle and see how the game looks once that's been kind of resolved. So that's the second thing to be aware of. There's a couple more things that I want to mention. The third thing is what concerns with kind of game management. So the way the game works right now is that either force wins if they control both Fox's Gap and Turner's Gap at the end of the conflict. If you do that, you win outright. If you don't, if each side controls one of the gaps, which seems to be a pretty common outcome because it's pretty balanced, if that happens, then you go to victory points. But there's no victory point track on the map. I feel like it would be a really nice addition if there were a player aid or some place where you could kind of track victory points for each side. And it's not a big deal. You're not like you're calculating like 40 victory points for each side. They're relatively limited, and you can kind of add them up pretty quickly, even though looking at them. But I find myself kind of taking out a piece of paper and jotting down victory point for this, victory point for that, and things like that. It'd be nice if there were a player aid for that. The second thing along those lines is there's a rally system in the game. So units have strength points. Say, for example, Confederate Union Infantry Brigade might have a strength point total of 4. If the unit suffers casualties, it can have 4 steps basically down to 0 where it would be wiped out. Once a unit has suffered casualties, it can never be rallied back to full strength. If a unit has suffered 2 or more strength point casualties, it can be rallied back up to 1 less than its maximum strength. And there's a rally phase in each turn where you're doing that. Well, the issue comes is that it's kind of hard to find the units that can potentially be rallied or not. And what I've resorted to doing is kind of looking at the order of battle to look at the full strength units and then going to find them on the battlefield and then figuring out where I can rally them. Now, it doesn't really come to play till later in the engagements when you've had a bunch of casualties where you're kind of doing this. It'd be really nice, though, if there were like a little indicator on a unit that it was at a strength that had the potential to be rallied. So for example, if you have a 5 strength Union, say, cavalry brigade, and once it gets to 4, there's a little marker on that unit, on the counter, that says, yep, you can rally this one. Then you could just look at the game board and you could see the strength and say, oh, okay, I can rally that one. Oh, I can rally that one. It's a little bit cumbersome to do it now because I kind of have to return to the order of battle and kind of say, oh, is this one at full strength? No, it's not, it's not. It takes a little bit more time than I think it could. I think that would be a nice little addition to have because it would kind of benefit gameplay and speed up gameplay a little bit, and especially in those later stages. Just one way I think the game could be made simpler and flow a little bit better. The third thing I want to mention with kind of game management and game flow is the surrender mechanic. And this goes to the later point that I make too. There's a couple of things I'm not a big fan of. First up, I don't like the surrender mechanic in the game. I feel like it's a little bit burdensome to handle. It doesn't happen that much, first of all. So that's one thing. You have to kind of get routed or can't retreat. It doesn't seem to quite happen so often. So it's not a huge deal. I've only had it happen 2 or 3 times now in 2 playthroughs. But when it does happen, it's like, I have to do this. And I would much rather just have the unit surrender rather than having to escort the unit off the map and then address the strength point issue. And that gets to the whole kind of player management thing. The game has these little 1-point counters that are detached units that kind of manage and guide the surrendered unit off. But that unit has only the leader's name on it, so it's kind of hard to figure out which unit was actually the unit that took the original strength point away from it and became the kind of the unit that escorted it off. And that might not make much sense, but that's kind of how it feels when you're playing it. So I find that I have to write that down on the side, which again, it's not really a big deal, but the whole thing about the surrendering, I would much rather have it, and I think I might make my own house rule, where if a unit surrenders, I just clear it off, and that's the other side gets 1 victory point. Because I feel like the amount of effort that's put into that mechanic doesn't repay itself in fun, if that makes sense. And every game has things like that where you're like, it's a little bit more work than it's worth, kind of thing like that. And the surrender mechanic in the game is one that I'm not a big fan of. The last thing that I've noticed in terms of playing through now, I think I'm in my 3rd game now of playing with it. The thing that I have noticed is that woods are tough to take, and woods are tough to take uphill too. So when you're attacking uphill into the woods, that's a hugely strong defensive position. And the way it works is that you need a 6 to basically hit a unit, and if a unit's in a hill, you have to re-roll the first 6 and then get a 5 or a 6. And when you're attacking uphill into woods, and cavalry can't attack into woods either, it creates a situation where like, wow, this is really hard. And I wonder if it's a little bit overpowered. I feel like I kind of have to play a couple more games to see, because eventually you can get them out if you bring enough force to bear on it, but it feels like you almost have to really generate this like really significant massive assault if you're going to go uphill into the woods. And I don't know how quite realistic that is. Maybe it is. First of all, I know you're assaulting uphill into woods. That's hard, right? I get it, especially if you're going up steep hills. But I wonder if the defensive bonus for being in woods, especially when it's uphill, makes it even a little bit trickier than it would have been. It feels like, wow, this is really something. Especially because you might only get one damage point to a unit defending in the hills, which means they're just going to kind of sit there, and then you have to go at them again. So it's tough to take woods, and I wonder about that strength and about the representation of that. It feels a little bit, perhaps a little bit overpowered to me. So all in all, you were saying, like, what's the final word on this one? What is the final word on Fire of the Mountain? Well, first of all, I think it's hard to give it a final word yet, right? Because I know there's going to be rules iterations where rules are adjusted with some of the answers that have been put on Board Game Geek and some of the information that's come out since the game's been released. So I expect that you'll see at some point in the very near future a kind of a revised rules edition that helps really clarify a lot of those edge cases and fleshes out the rule system to make it easier to play and easier to kind of play in line with what the designer's vision was. And so that, I think, is something to consider going forward, that I think the game right now and what it will be maybe a month or two down the line is probably going to be a little bit different, and that there's some potential there for the game to be much sharper and much crisper to play as the rules get fleshed out. And I know the designers, the developers are thinking about perhaps this might be a system that could be used to cover other small-scale Civil War engagements. And for that sake, I think I'm very excited about the system in that capacity, very excited about the system, the way it can become. It feels like, again, those rules need to be fleshed out a little bit. Yet, having said that, right now, when you play the game, it's like, wow, this is just fun to play. So if you're a fan of Civil War games and some of the issues that I've mentioned don't bother you, I think you'll enjoy this game a lot. I've had a lot of fun playing it. I enjoy playing it. I'm going to play it. I want to keep playing it because I feel like each time I play it, I learn new things and get new ideas for how to use the battlefield and how to attack and things like that. I've greatly enjoyed my time with this game. My analogy is this. I feel like I'm driving a Ferrari that doesn't have headlights and doesn't have mirrors, right? So you're going down the road, they're like, wow, this is so much fun. And then it starts to get dark and you're like, wait, what do I do? Right? And there's no answer. Or like, okay, I got to back it up now. It's like, oh, wait, what do I do? So 80% of the time, it's absolutely fine. And then 20% of the time, you kind of have to wing it a little bit. You kind of have to look on Board Game Geek to fill in the pieces, what's going on. So once the headlights and once the mirrors get added to the Ferrari, this is going to be incredibly fun to play. Now, whether you want to wait for that or whether you want to jump in now, that's kind of a personal decision. I think it's playable. I think it's fun. I think it's a really good game right now. But I can also see people that might want to wait for that rule system to get fleshed out and then evaluate the game at that point in time. Likewise, similar issue with the order of battle. The game is balanced, it flows, it's fun, it's good to play right now, but that historical order of battle element might be something that matters a lot to you, so you might say, yeah, I'm going to wait to see how that influences gameplay and how the tweaks to the game system address that and how they do that going forward. So you might want to wait for that if that's something that's important to you. The other things I think are more minor, the kind of the game management things. I'm probably going to throw the surrender rule out just because I just don't feel like it's worth it. It's not super fun and it's such a small part of the game that I'm just going to say the unit's gone and take it off. It's a cool idea, but in execution, it's just not fun to do, and it's not really a big part of the game. But all said, step back moment, I'm glad I've played this game. I'm going to keep playing it. I love the potential for the system. I think it's going to be incredibly fun. And again, my analogy right now, it's that Ferrari without some headlights and mirrors, and I'm fine with it. I think that's good. I give it a thumbs up for that, but I can totally see there's some qualifications to that thumbs up that might make you want to consider whether you want to get the game now, or you might want to wait a little bit to see how it evolves over the course of the next month or two. That brings us to the end of this one. If you have liked this review, you might also like our review of Hill of Doves, which is another game from Legion Wargames. That's a solitaire war game of the First Anglo-Boer War, and I think you might enjoy taking a look at that review as well. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again in a video soon.